The sound of shuffling papers, low whispers, and the occasional cough filled the air of Courtroom 6B. It was a room Marcus Reed knew well, though familiarity never dulled the unease he felt each time he stepped inside. The high ceilings, carved oak panels, and stern portraits of past judges seemed designed to remind everyone that justice here was not only serious but intimidating. Marcus, however, had long since learned that the grandeur of the courtroom did not guarantee fairness. It merely cloaked bias in ceremony. At 35, Marcus was one of the youngest partners at his firm and one of the few black defense attorneys with a reputation for dismantling prosecutors' cases piece by piece. Sharp-minded, meticulous, and uncompromising, he had built his name on defending those society too often discarded. When he first agreed to represent Jamal Carter, a teenager accused of resisting arrest after being brutally beaten by police, he knew the case would be difficult. What he hadn't anticipated was just how deep the rot ran. 3 officers from the 9th Precinct, Whitman, Doyle, and Carver, sat at the defense table, their polished uniforms and steely expressions designed to convey authority. To the untrained eye, they looked like upstanding men unfairly maligned. But Marcus knew better. He had watched the shaky bodycam footage frame by frame. He had seen Officer Whitman slip a small plastic bag from his jacket and pretend to discover it under Jamal's seat. He had heard the snide laughter in the background as Jamal cried out in pain. And he had listened to Officer Ramirez, a rare whistleblower, describe in hushed tones the games his colleagues played at the expense of young black men. Marcus stood, his posture crisp, as he delivered his closing argument. His voice, resonant yet steady, carried through the courtroom with the weight of undeniable truth. The badge is supposed to stand for integrity, for service, for honor. Yet these men, he gestured toward the officers, turned it into a shield for their crimes. You saw the footage. You heard the testimony. They planted evidence. They brutalized a teenager. And when caught, they twisted their lies into reports that would have destroyed Jamal Carter's life. If not for the courage of Officer Ramirez, this truth might never have come to light. He paused, letting the jury meet his eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably, others avoided his gaze. Marcus pressed forward, his words cutting with precision. This is not about hating police. This is about holding accountable those who betray the very trust they swore to uphold. Justice demands courage, not the courage to look away, but the courage to confront corruption head-on. As he returned to his seat, his heart raced. He had done everything possible, laid out the evidence, cross-examined with skill, and appealed to the jury's conscience. Now it was out of his hands. The prosecutor rose with a smirk that Marcus found all too familiar. A tall man with graying temples. His voice dripped with condescension. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not be swayed by theatrics. The footage is grainy. You cannot say with certainty what you saw. Officer Ramirez? A disgruntled employee seeking revenge. And Jamal Carter? A troubled teen with a history of disobedience. Are we really to believe these decorated officers suddenly turned into criminals overnight? He paced slowly, pausing for effect. Do not let emotion cloud your judgment. Do not let the narrative distract from the facts or lack thereof. Marcus clenched his jaw, but remained still. He knew the tactics: discredit the victim, protect the badge, muddy the waters until the jury lost sight of the truth. Finally, Judge William Harland addressed the jury. Harland was a towering figure in his late 60s, his reputation spanning decades. But beneath the robe and gravitas, Marcus sensed something more troubling, a smugness in the judge's eyes each time Marcus objected, a thinly veiled disdain whenever he mentioned police misconduct. Harland's rulings throughout the trial had been curiously one-sided. Evidence excluded, objections overruled, lines of questioning cut short. Marcus had noted each instance, the tally forming an ugly pattern. The jury will now deliberate, Harland announced. His gavel struck, once, sharp and final. The hours that followed crawled by. Marcus sat at the defense table, his pen tapping rhythmically, his thoughts replaying the evidence. He thought of Jamal's mother, who had whispered through tears, Please, Mr. Reed, don't let them bury my boy. He thought of the long nights, combing through reports, the threats that had flooded his voicemail, and the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. When the jury filed back in less than 2 hours later, Marcus's stomach tightened. That was too fast. Justice, when done thoroughly, took time. The foreman handed the slip to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Harlan's expression did not change as he scanned it. Then he spoke, his voice deliberate and heavy. On the charges of evidence tampering, police brutality, and conspiracy, the defendants are found not guilty. The words slammed into Marcus like a hammer. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jamal's mother clutched her chest, letting out a broken cry. The officers exchanged firm handshakes, thin smiles of triumph playing on their lips. One of them glanced at Marcus with a glimmer of mockery in his eyes. Marcus sat frozen, disbelief coursing through him. He turned to the jury, scanning their faces. Some looked guilty, others detached. One elderly man shifted uncomfortably, as if ashamed of the decision he had helped deliver. But the verdict stood. Order. Order in the court. Judge Harlan banged his gavel sharply, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of satisfaction. And in that fleeting look, Marcus saw it. Collusion, corruption, the hand of a man who had already decided the outcome long before the trial began. As the room emptied in chaos, reporters scribbling notes, family members sobbing, police officers congratulating one another, Marcus remained seated. His body was still, but his mind was ablaze. This was more than a lost case. This was a warning. The rot in the system went higher than dirty cops. It stretched into the bench itself, into the very man meant to uphold justice. When he finally rose, Jamal's mother grabbed his arm, her tear-streaked face desperate. "What happens now?" she whispered. Marcus looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. Now we fight harder. This isn't the end." That night, in the solitude of his office, Marcus replayed the day's events again and again. He saw Harlan's dismissive glares, his swift rulings, his thin smile as the officers walked free. He saw the puzzle pieces aligning into something bigger, kickbacks, favors, deals whispered in shadows. He knew corruption when he smelled it, and Harlan reeked of it. The city skyline glowed outside his window, indifferent and unyielding. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaustion heavy in his bones but fire burning in his chest. He whispered to himself, the words both a vow and a challenge. "Judge Harlan, I'm coming for you." The city seemed louder than usual in the days after the verdict, though Marcus Reed knew it was not the noise that had changed. It was him. Every siren that wailed in the distance, every headline flashing on the news, every hushed conversation about police misconduct reminded him of the injustice that had unfolded under Judge Harlan's gavel. The officers had walked free, but Marcus refused to let the truth be buried. He had seen too much in that courtroom. The judge's selective rulings, the suspiciously swift deliberation, the smugness that had slipped across Harlan's face. This was not incompetence. It was corruption. The decision gnawed at him late into the night. Marcus found himself in his office, surrounded by stacks of files and empty coffee cups, long after the rest of the city slept. He combed through case histories, pulling records of trials presided over by Harlan. Patterns began to emerge. In case after case involving officers accused of misconduct, Harlan's rulings had tilted in their favor. Evidence mysteriously excluded, whistleblowers silenced, victims' credibility shredded. Statistically, the pattern was too lopsided to be coincidence. Marcus scribbled notes, drawing lines between cases' dates and names. The web grew denser with each hour, threads connecting Harlan, not just to the officers of the 9th Precinct, but to the police union that backed them. Digging deeper, Marcus requested financial disclosures and property records, public documents, though rarely scrutinized. That's where he found the cracks. A luxury condo, downtown, purchased under market value. Donations to Harlan's judicial campaign traced back to a construction company notorious for laundering union funds. A trust account in his wife's name, receiving regular consulting fees from firms linked to real estate developers. The evidence wasn't enough yet to prove corruption in court, but it was enough to stoke Marcus's fire. He needed more. He reached out to contacts, whispering through late-night phone calls with journalists, activists, and even former clerks who had worked under Harland. Stories trickled in unexplained rulings, sudden reversals, prosecutors who bragged of inside support. Piece by piece, the image of a compromised judge grew sharper. But digging into corruption came with a price. One evening, as Marcus left his office, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the glow of the streetlights, but the engine purred softly, waiting. The next morning, he found his car vandalized, its tires slashed, a single note tucked under the windshield. Drop it. Marcus read the words without flinching. Intimidation only confirmed he was on the right path. Still, he was not reckless. He shared his findings with trusted colleagues, storing duplicates of every file in encrypted drives. If anything happens to me, he told his mentor, a retired civil rights attorney named Gloria Price, this evidence won't disappear. Gloria, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, placed a hand on his shoulder. Then make sure it doesn't. You're carrying more than your own fight, Marcus. You're carrying the fight of every client who's ever been silenced. Encouraged, Marcus doubled down. He met with Officer Ramirez in a dimly lit diner on the edge of town, the man's nervous eyes darting at every customer who walked in. You were brave to testify, Marcus told him, sliding a folder across the table. But I need more. I need proof that Harlan's ties to the union run deeper. Ramirez hesitated, then exhaled. There are things I didn't say in court, he admitted. Orders came down from above. We knew Harlan would handle it. Everyone in the precinct knew. He scribbled names on a napkin, union reps, middlemen, even a prosecutor who had been friendly with Harlan's chambers. The investigation stretched on for weeks. Marcus barely slept, chasing leads from courthouse archives to union offices. He uncovered whispers of bribes funneled through real estate deals, campaign contributions disguised as consulting contracts, and a closed-door meeting between Harlan and union leaders just days before Jamal Carter's trial. The puzzle was complete. Harlan was not just protecting rogue officers. He was actively profiting from their protection. With evidence in hand, Marcus faced a choice. He could take the case quietly to the state's Judicial Review Board, risk months of bureaucracy, and hope politics didn't swallow the truth. Or he could go public, expose everything in one decisive move. The second path was dangerous, but Marcus had learned that corruption thrived in silence. He chose exposure. On a brisk Monday morning, reporters crowded the steps of the courthouse. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Marcus stood at the podium, a thick binder of documents before him. His navy suit was crisp, his tie knotted tightly, but his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights. Still, his voice rang clear. For too long, he began, this city has trusted a system that claims to serve justice while protecting corruption. I stood in this very courthouse as 3 officers walked free after brutalizing a teenager, despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt. And I asked myself, how? How could justice be so blind? The answer, my friends, is that it was never blind at all. He opened the binder, holding up copies of property records, financial statements, and case histories. Judge William Harlan has betrayed the oath of his office. He has ruled not according to law, but according to loyalty to the police union that lined his pockets, to the developers who funded his lifestyle, to the powerful who shield him from accountability. These are not accusations without proof. These are facts. The crowd erupted with questions, reporters shouting over one another. Marcus raised his hand for silence. Today, I am filing a formal complaint with the Judicial Review Board, supported by this evidence. But let it be known, we will not wait quietly for justice to trickle through red tape. We demand transparency. We demand accountability. And we demand it now. Within hours, the story exploded across headlines. Judge Harlan accused of corruption. Defense attorney exposes ties between police union and courtroom. The public's reaction was swift and furious. Civil rights groups rallied in the streets, chanting Marcus's name alongside calls for Harlan's resignation. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves, some demanding investigations, others feigning shock. Harlan, for his part, appeared on television days later, his face pale, but defiant. "These claims are baseless," he insisted, his voice shaking slightly. "I have served this city with honor for over 3 decades." But the tide had already turned. Each denial only fueled scrutiny, and soon, whistleblowers emerged corroborating Marcus's findings. Weeks later, the review board announced its decision. Harlan was suspended pending further investigation. Prosecutors opened a criminal inquiry into bribery and conspiracy. The officers from Jamal's case were retried under a new judge, and this time, with the corruption exposed, the truth prevailed. Convictions were handed down, and Jamal's family finally breathed the relief of justice delayed but not denied. Marcus watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and weariness. The fight had cost him sleep, peace, and even safety, but it had also reaffirmed his purpose. Standing outside the courthouse as supporters gathered around him, chanting his name, he raised his hand not in victory, but in solidarity. "This isn't about me," he told the crowd. "It's about every Jamal Carter who was told the system would never believe them. It's about every mother who sat in a courtroom praying for justice. And it's about proving that no robe, no badge, no office is above accountability. Justice will not be silenced." As the sun set over the city that evening, Marcus Reed stood taller than he had the day of the verdict. He had lost a battle, but he had ignited a movement. And in that moment, he knew the law was not just ink on paper. In the right hands, it was a weapon against corruption, a shield for the vulnerable, and a beacon for a better tomorrow.